Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan is creating a culture of reading with the goal of improving student learning through intensively improving reading skills. The 5-year plan includes the Common Reading Initiative, the College Reading Initiative, and the Faculty Development Initiative. In the following roundtable discussion, Troy faculty members discuss techniques and practices they use to create a culture of reading.
Hello and welcome to a roundtable discussion on engaged reading organized by Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan. I'm Priya Menon, the moderator for today's discussion on the culture of engaged reading. Today's participants will discuss a variety of issues based on engaged reading in the specific disciplines of mathematics and sciences. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our participants. We've got Dr. Ken Robley from mathematics, Ms. Janet Gaston from biology, Dr. Ben Burrington from physics, Dr. Bill Zhang from computer science, and Dr. Amy Spurlock from nursing. Welcome to this panel. Let's begin with a general question. What kinds of reading do we do in our classrooms? How do you encourage your students to learn, to read? Dr. Spurlock.
Well, nursing students at the undergraduate level might read anywhere from 10 to 12 chapters a week, which could be 500 to 700 pages on average. So reading is critical to nursing students just because of the volume of knowledge. But our reading builds on the prerequisite courses they've had in biology and chemistry and math. So our students, we really encourage them to start by skim reading when they're reading. And what that is they might look at a chapter and they would organize their reading based upon what they already know. It's really more at the nursing level, at the application level. So we would not expect to have to redo learning that they should have had in the sciences. So they really build upon that knowledge for nursing.
Okay. So skim reading forms the foundation of your course.
If a nursing student is going to survive and graduate, it has to.
Got you. Okay. All right. What about you, Dr. Zhang?
Well, we encourage our students to read as well, and a lot of people think, well, computer science really has nothing, or very little to do with reading, but that's not entirely true. And we encourage our students, and actually require in many cases our students read book chapters, and the professors will pick. And from time to time, the professor will pick certain book and make a copy of those books, of those chapters, and ask their student to read and write a summary, and maybe tell other students about. Now, the kind of reading we encourage a student to read mostly focus on technology and ethics. And ethics have been a great issue, a big concern in computer science, and there are all kinds of problems if we don't deal with this well. So we encourage our students to delve into that issue and really focus on how to form a good ethics when it comes to technology.
What about you, Dr. Burrington?
So most of the reading that we have in science, and particularly mathematics, is actually very dense reading. So rather than 500 pages or something like that as a reading assignment, you might assign just 10 or 15 pages, and that is a lot of material to get through. But the problem with that is the text is very dense, and so reading comprehension is extremely important at that level because you're going through very small bits of material, but you're supposed to be learning not just about something or learning a narrative, but trying to learn something to do. You have to learn an ability as you're going. And this is something that I think is very different in many of the sciences and in mathematics. So.
All right, Ms. Gaston, please.
Well, ours is a lot like nursing. They have to read a lot. The material is dense, but we do a lot of case studies. And so they have to do a lot of reading outside the box. So it's in addition to the textbook information, which they have to read or they won't succeed. And to be able to understand the lectures that are going on, they have to read the text. And critical thinking is a very key thing here. But to do case studies, they have to do a lot of reading in order to take the information and put it and apply it to the case study. So it's a lot of reading, a lot.
What about mathematics, Dr. Robley? Do we read in math at all, or is it just equations?
Well, there's more reading than you might think. In math, it's important for the students to read and understand with full comprehension the definitions, the notation, any ideas presented in class, the formulas, of course, and being able to understand those, and even more so the mathematical proofs. We really emphasize that, especially in the math major. And they must really be able to fully read, possibly reread several times a mathematical proof so that they can understand the logical thinking involved in writing a proof. And then after that, we try to get them involved by working their own exercises and writing their own proofs to let them practice that a little bit, and that helps them gauge their own understanding of it.
So one of the things that I think is common to our table is that there is a different sort of set of skill sets that are required for students of science and technology and mathematics. How are they prepared as they move into a university setting at Troy University when they come in from, say, a high school? Are they prepared at all? What are some of the difficulties that you encounter as you begin teaching, say, a freshman classroom? Anyone?
I think a lot of them come in and they're used to memorizing, just rote memory. And here you have to think. And those skills they have difficulty with. And you have to really teach them, you've got to read the material and learn the definitions, but then you have to be able to apply it.
Exactly.
And that is a big problem for us.
Yeah, somehow getting them to internalize. It's not just a definition that they're going to have to regurgitate
Right.
that definition. They have to understand
They
what all
have
of
to
those words
understand.
mean and how to apply that in some situation
right.
that they haven't seen before.
Right.
And this is something that a lot of students, again, they do have difficulty with at first, but you can build them up to it. You can start them with some fairly low-level problems where they're only doing one step of generalization, and you're doing 2 steps, then you're doing 3 steps, and then finally you're dealing with a situation that doesn't look like anything that you started with, but you can still apply the same principles. And that's something that's, again, it's one of the reasons that science and technology, the thinking involved is so powerful, is it applies to so many different situations, but that also means it's very abstract.
Right.
And in nursing, our students generally don't begin coursework until their junior year. So they've already had a lot of your courses, thankfully, so they've had some of that already. When they get to us, they really have to be able to look at a vast volume of material, synthesize it, make judgments, and then apply it in the clinical setting. So it's not just, you're right, it's not just rote memorization. They have to be able to learn the content and think, okay, if I have a patient with this disease process, these are the complications that can ensue, and they take it to the next level. So
Do you find that they use the systematic thinking that science does in general, and they use that as a framework to filter all of that information? Because
I
that's
would
one
say
of the things.
yes,
With a
absolutely.
vast amount of information, that one of the key skills is organizing it, right? And
You're
sort
right.
of you need a framework to organize it in.
And I think that's a problem that a lot of students come in, they don't know how to organize.
No.
Yep.
They don't know how to organize their notes, their reading, their time, and that's a very key thing right there. It's just plain organization.
Do we have any sort of courses as such that introduces a student to this sort of a set skill?
I think a study skill course is I think all students need to take some kind of study skill course, because there they learn to take notes, because a lot of kids do not know how to take notes. They want to, even if you have a PowerPoint or a lecture, they want to write down every single word that you say rather than writing the concept down. But they want to sit and write every A, N, and B, which is, it's wasting their time. And
What about in math, Dr. Robley?
Well, I think it's important, some of what other people have said about this, about it's not just about the rote memorization of, for example, a definition. You have to be able to, there's a logic behind that definition or a logic behind that idea, and they have to develop that, and that helps in their own independent thinking and logical thinking in it. And that's something we really try to encourage and try to build their confidence up in, is that side of things, and establishing their own logical thinking through a problem and through reading too, to be able to analyze the what they're reading in the problems.
And it's also sometimes very interesting for students to, when they deal with a logical structure, to start pulling out parts of it to see where it fails, and to see, and getting students involved in doing that is also something that can really help them understand why are, why are all of these moving parts there? Why do I have all of those bits to the definition? Well, it's because if I pull this out, then it doesn't apply over here, or, and just to make, and that's something, that type of critical thinking is also something that they're not necessarily used to. They're not used to saying, here's a definition, what happens with when I mess with it, right? They don't think in those terms. They think, this is a definition, that's what it is.
And what can I do with that definition? How can I apply that definition to the task at hand?
That's nursing. It's all about parameters.
Right, see,
If this is your
yeah, in
parameter, then
science,
what's going to happen? So
that's right,
that
that's
prepares
right.
them.
That's a very...
And a lot of the
that's-
students come in and they want to read the whole chapter.
Yes.
Just sit down and read the whole chapter instead of breaking it in sections and kind of trying to understand the section before you move to the next section. Because the next section builds on the first. So if you really don't know what you've done in the first, you're not going to be able to understand the rest of them. So that is a problem for us in sciences as well.
So for a non-science person such as myself, when you read in the sciences and mathematics, for example, what you're essentially trying to do is take a linguistic model and convert it into, say, a sort of equations or a problem or a different sort of a language, right? So what transition is necessary for a student to move from that basic linguistic or phonetic sort of a transcription to a scientific sort of a reading? What are some of your suggestions for that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we run into all the time in physics is that all of our problems are word problems. You phrase it as, a car starts at rest and it has uniform acceleration of this, and but breaking down those words, what does it mean, What does it mean it starts at rest? You have to teach kids, oh, this corresponds to velocity equals 0. Okay. And it's translating all of these ideas into an equation, because an equation is actually a very condensed form of ideas. But being able to go back and forth is actually a very important skill, at least in physics. So, but
What about computer science?
Well, we actually do the same thing. Now, in computer science, critical thinking is very, very important. Now, that's why if you take the first couple of our CS courses, although they are actually teaching programming language, but they're not called programming language courses, they're called problem-solving courses, because we try to teach students not exactly how to write programs, but rather to solve problems with computer programs. And critical thinking is important, I think, particularly when you have a vast amount of information. How do you filter all this information to get what the most important parts? That's important. Now, one thing I do want remind our students that sometimes do not overthink. Sometimes students overthink.
Oh, yes.
And the whole subject of science, for that matter computer science, has been established for the past maybe 60 years. You cannot spend 10 hours on one single subject and hope that you can establish the subject in 60 years. It doesn't work that way. In other words, don't overthink it.
We have a lot of them trying to overanalyze
Yes, we do.
everything.
yeah.
Okay. What about testing? Have you noticed that, when you assign a particular amount of material that involves quite a bit of reading, do students fare particularly better in test taking compared to just a problem, perhaps? Is there any sort of a discrepancy that you have found in their ability to perform better if they have to read and respond, as opposed to just coming into a classroom and solving a particular equation? I'm sorry to keep bringing up equation.
But they do. They have to know the terms, and that's just basic definition. But they have to read it and be able to apply it. And those that do that do well on exams and discussion exams. And you have to read. You have to be able to find the critical thinking and find the elements that you need, pick out of this paragraph to use to solve this problem.
Yeah. And the other thing, one of my colleagues always referred to it as proof by repeat exposure.
Right.
And that
That's
actually helps a
exactly
lot
right.
as having more than one channel of learning, right? So you get it in the classroom, then you do it on the homework, but you also should get it in the reading because you're getting it from,
Right.
you're getting it in a different voice, you're getting different perspectives on things, maybe even a different order of presentation of the material that might make sense for some students. Depends on the student's background, whether one presentation versus another will
Right.
make the most sense. So just that sort of, again, proof by repeat exposure can be very, very helpful for getting students over a hump of saying, I don't understand this, and then something clicks into place when they just get it from a different source. And then suddenly everything that you were saying makes sense in context of what the book had to say or what this other source had to say.
I agree.
So-
In nursing, they do clinicals. They go into clinical settings. They take care of people as registered nurses would, and so I might tell them, well, this is what you'll see with somebody that has type 2 diabetes mellitus. But when they get it in the clinical setting, and they're also having to deal with, okay, this is a male, he's over 60, he's got peripheral vascular disease, he's got cardiac issues on top of it. These are his meds. How do you handle this? You know, so really, it's not just learning in the classroom. They're applying it actively in clinical settings. So they have to, reading comprehension and application in nursing has been linked to improved student learning outcomes, GPA,
Sure.
graduation rates,
Sure.
and the ability to pass the NCLEX RN exam, which is what makes them a nurse. So,
Right.
I think that the reading aspect of it is a nice enhancement to what they're already learning, and it helps them even be able to, for example, solve problems and construct, in my field, a mathematical proof even better because they've read it before and they understand what components are involved in it, and it just helps them overall instead of just writing, for example, the answer is 7 at the end of a problem. It helps them in their overall understanding of it and their own explaining of it too.
That's an interesting point because it can help also just to have an example of what it means to construct something and having it written down in front of you and saying this is how a proof is constructed, or this is how a solution is constructed, or this is how I take parts from the text and turn it into an answer. That's also a very nice, that's a critical skill to learn, and to learn to be able to, again, that means you've really internalized what you've read. So.
What about notation? Like for every specific field, a word like energy, for example, could mean a totally different thing in physics as opposed to an English classroom, right? Do we have any sort of lectures or courses, or how do you prepare your student to move from the regular, normal, pleasure reading sort of situation to encountering a word which might mean different? I don't want to use the word jargon because that's not what we're talking about. The meaning of that particular word, the connotation might be different, specific to each of our fields. How do we transition our students to look at these words, these key lexical words perhaps, and decipher it differently?
nursing actually has a medical terminology course that
Right.
students take because it's a different language.
Okay.
It is.
So that prepares them.
We don't necessarily have a course, but I think reading will help students in overcoming some of those problems. If they read those professional journals, those we encourage students to read IT blogs. I encourage them to read on daily basis IT blogs, so they will see those terms. And when they see those terms and they don't know what it means, they'll look it up and they will discuss this with professors as to what it means in this context. I think reading really helps in that regard.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah, it's important also if you're going to be using technical language just to say in a classroom setting, okay, we're going to use this word now technically for this classroom. For our purposes, this is what it means,
Right,
nothing else.
right.
So you start off with that, and then the students are usually, if they have baggage that goes along with that word, they're able to let it go much more easily if you tell them, listen, we're going to be using this technically. I know you think of, I don't know, work as being one thing, but in a
Right.
physics classroom, work
Right.
means something very specific. So it's, you sort of put it in its own little box, and students can more readily accept it as long as it's sort of being honest with your students to tell them up front, we're using English in a technical setting, so
Right.
we need to use it very
I agree with that.
narrowly.
I heard and a math instructor one time say that instead of, like in real estate, they say the 3 most important things are location, location, location. They said in math, the 3 most important things are notation, notation, notation. And which is, you know, a lot of truth to that. And we actually do have a mathematics course. It's called Introduction to Advanced Math, and it's like our bridge course that teaches them the notation and proper techniques for succeeding in the upper level courses too. So we have a course specifically designed for that type of thing.
That's pretty good.
Okay. I want us to talk a little bit about, you know, a student that might be having difficulty in reading. What do you do to help a student who might be having certain sort of difficulties in understanding keywords? Do you send them to a writing center? What sort of help is given to them? Is there a special sort of environment that?
Actually, could I ask a question that actually
Sure.
riffs off of that
Yeah,
question?
sure.
How do you guys diagnose when their problem is with reading comprehension? Because I find it difficult sometimes to determine, okay, is this student not getting this concept, or is this a broader problem of reading comprehension? That's
Right.
hard to
Good
diagnose.
question.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So can you, anybody?
Do you have like a basic set of tests that you might give initially in a classroom to sort of understand where the problem might be? Would it differ from each discipline?
Well, luckily for us, and most of our students that come to computer science classes are not freshmen, and they are at least sophomore, or in many cases junior. And they have acquired quite a bit reading skills. And I do not normally worry about their reading skills. I'm more concerned with their critical thinking. So what we do is that we organize students into groups to discuss the book chapters that we assign them to read. And then they will give presentations, and so that other people can make comments on that.
That's good.
Okay. I want us to talk a little bit about the QEP Common Reader that we usually use at Troy University. Have any one of you used that particular reader in your classrooms? What are some of the experiences that you might want to share with us today? I know Dr. Spurlock has used the Ghost Map last year. How did that go?
That was a great one for us because it was talking about health and things. So I actually teach the doctoral level courses. I'm the coordinator of the doctoral program, and so I teach applied biostatistics.
Okay.
And so one of the things I did is I created a fake data set that Dr. Snow, if he had access to SPSS at the time, which is the software package, he might have compiled. And then I had the students on their first assignment kind of do a scavenger hunt to figure out the parts of a data set and levels of measurement and things like that. And afterward, I actually had a couple of students that said, I think it's so cool that Dr. Snow had this data set. I thought, well, no, that was me actually. But it was part of the learning process. And then we also then pulled in the ethics piece, because anytime you're talking about a science, there's also that ethical component to it.
Right.
So, and we talked about, you know, the importance of asking questions, which is what Dr. Snow did, because he was really bucking the trend, you know, for scientific thinking at the time. So it was really useful to me. Now, if we have a book like, you know, Frankenstein, that might be a little harder, but although there's ethics there too, so that's how we used it.
Okay. Anyone else who's used
We
the book?
did the Cracker Childhood.
Yes.
That we did, and that was really good because it tied right into general biology.
Okay.
And the kids enjoyed that because a lot of that was set in Georgia, which a lot of kids were from Georgia, and they were like, oh, I know that area, I know what you're talking about. That was great, and they enjoyed reading that book.
So making that connection with
Yes,
them
that real life.
worked. Okay. Did you see that they were more engaged with biology because they read the textbook?
I think so.
Could they-
I
okay.
think so.
Right.
That when we would get to the ecology portion of the course,
Right.
they were real enthused because they had read in the book,
Yeah.
and they could see about the longleaf pines and all the little areas around and the area of the country that it was in. And it made, when you talk about ecology, it just brought it in,
Makes sense.
enhanced it, I guess.
Okay. Okay.
We've had the QEP reader for the College of Arts and Sciences, and I've implemented that in some of my courses, and so we usually have them do a reading assignment, and then we'll have a discussion time in class, and it's great to always hear the students' thoughts on it and their viewpoints on it, and you get a lot of good discussion out of that. one thing we try to do is, like some of the others, is we try to tie that to the actual math discipline too. And then the last one we read, it was about a scientist, Joseph Priestley, and we tried to, in his life and his discoveries in science, and we tried to, for the math major, we tried to compare and contrast his methods with the mathematical approach to knowledge instead. So you get a lot of good engagement from the students out of that, and a lot of good feedback from that too, and hopefully they can take some stuff from that as well.
That's great.
Beyond the math.
You talked about, Dr. Zhang, about the ethics, the ethical element in your courses. Could you say a few more sentences on that, a few more lines on it?
Sure,
How
sure.
is it important?
Ethics is absolutely important when it comes to computer science, and particularly when you understand with the recent current events and on the cyber attacks and all that, you understand the importance of ethics in computer science, and we train our students to be a very, very responsible professionals in the future, and this is something that we stress from day one, that you will do things within the square of laws. That's 1. 2 is that you will do things within the conscience and within the disciplines, within the rules, regulations of our profession. And as an engineer, as a computer scientist, we do have those ethical rules that govern us.
So perhaps introduce them to blogs or newspaper articles.
Absolutely,
that
and
books.
we introduce them to blogs, and we watch those cases that are even coming out of the Supreme Court, and such as Samsung sues Apple sues Samsung, and so on and so forth. So we look at all these cases and to try to predict where the trend is, where this industry is going, and so on. So all these are important issues.
Just the last question. I want to know what, if someone's watching us, what can they take away? Just say they want some sort of tips in terms of how do I improve reading skills in my own classroom, based on your own discipline and your own experience. What tip would you give to another professor? We'll begin with Dr. Robley.
Well, I would always first encourage either faculty or students to encourage your students to take advantage of the resources here at the university. For example, our writing center, our computer work center, our natural science learning center. There are so many great resources with fantastic people there too to help with anybody that needs help, and even more so as far as the students go. I think it's always good to encourage your students to come by outside of class. Yeah. I think that you should develop that relationship and continually work with your students one-on-one, and remove that barrier of the possible fear of going to your professor's office and asking for help. You've got to have a good working relationship with them, and just continually work with your students on that.
What about you, Ms.
I
Gaston?
agree with that, because at the Natural Science Center, we are very fortunate to have students that are very knowledgeable and that can help. And sometimes it's good for them to go to another student to help and see their take on a passage or a chapter. And as well come to the office and sit down with us one-on-one. But a lot of times they can understand from another student's point of view, and it helps a lot too.
All right. What about you, Dr. Burrington?
For reading comprehension, one of the things that I most common run into is them breaking down a word problem and learning how to solve it. And just for me, doing it at the board in front of them. I mean, write down the entire word problem and then just color code everything. Say, this is a key word, this is what it means, this is a key word, this is what it means. Really breaking down the problems. A lot of my students have said that that's really helped them to better understand how to attack problems themselves.
Okay. Dr. Zhang?
Well, I just felt that as part of the mission of our educators, and we should encourage students to read, because not only we're preparing them for the profession, but also we want them to be well-rounded in the future.
Right.
And I'd say reading is foundational. It's the first thing they do. It's not the only thing they do.
Right.
They should read first, come to the lecture, come prepared.
Right.
If they're online, they need to be self-directed. Reading's important.
Right. And it gives you the basis of what, if you read the chapters, and we try to get them to read the chapters before they come to class, then they'll understand what's going on in class.
And apply.
Take notes, go home, reread your notes, and make the connections between the two things.
Reading is important, even in
It
sciences
is.
and
It is
mathematics.
very
Yes,
much
yes.
critical.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on today's roundtable. We hope that you enjoyed this discussion and that it was useful. We look forward to seeing you again on another round of roundtables. Till then, goodbye.
To learn more about Troy's Quality Enhancement Plan, visit troy.edu. Details on the Quality Enhancement Plan can be found by clicking on Current Students and looking under Student Resources.